Right. Hello everyone, my name is Eduards Saļņikovs. I am from Intrum Justitia, which is the partner and sponsor of this event, and I will speak about managing geographically diverse projects. So if you work in a multinational corporation or a bigger company which spreads business outside boundaries of your home market, probably you are working in geographically diverse project. Okay, some few words about Intrum Justitia, who we are and what we do, where I particularly am currently employed. So we are founded in 1923, so pretty much old company, so to speak. SDC, which is Software Development Center in Riga, actually is quite young, so we're about 5-6 years from inception. And actually we are about 160 big in Riga and still growing. So we're serving here from Riga all of the group companies around Europe, which actually employs around 4,000 people. And maybe if you have heard news just recently this week or last week, actually we have been merged with other credit management company, which is our competitor, Lindorf. And we're twice as big now after this merger when it had been approved by European Commission. So what we do credit optimization services, collection services, payment services, e-commerce, accounts receivable management. So everything which is around payments and invoices, so we do that stuff actually. We automate things, we do implement some new systems, we maintain old systems, and basically all countries which I will speak of in this presentation and technologies as well, actually is part of our daily job in SDC. So let's start. Start with probably our customers. So who are we serving? And we're actually working with major telecom, finance, and retail, and probably lots of other also industries. So bigger ones out of those probably are not here. You probably have heard about Google's and Facebook's. Those are our clients as well. So those are served by the systems which we maintain. And before we start, I would like to ask you one tricky question. So in 2008, remember that interesting year when all finances went down, and actually Intrum Justitia, well, in some sense profited from that. How it is good or bad, that's the other question. But in 2008, abbreviation of AI was the hype. But it was not meaning artificial intelligence at that time. So artificial intelligence actually is becoming hype just recently. And maybe some of you know what was very big hype with the abbreviation of AI at the time of 2008. Any guesses?
Auto insurance?
Alternative investment.
Alternative investment, okay. Yeah, finances. Insurance, also finance. No other opinions? No. Okay, so one mentioning of the news actually became very popular at that year. Speaking of artificial islands, actually the problem which Silicon Valley investors and financiers were about to solve was innovation decoupling on the dependence of the local regulation and rules. So basically in the country you usually have local culture, local native, I don't know, some rules and some practices, right? So to innovate probably you need to step aside from the old dogmas and thinking. So that was the idea, to build an artificial island somewhere in the middle of the ocean. No legislation, international waters, basically, so to speak, engineers or programmers nirvana. So you can do whatever you want, just code, work, and innovate. So that was the idea from Peter Thiel, who actually is a co-founder of the PayPal, and he proposed to build this artificial island. Unfortunately, the idea didn't went through forward. And today, other hype is artificial intelligence. So that's the next step today. Actually, one of the things we're doing in Intrum Justitia SDC as well. But what's the problem today? For instance, if you use Google Translate, Yeah, you probably need to define all those abstract meanings when you translate from one language to another. So this is cultural thing, and you need to have some kind of understanding of what one word means in the other language and in other culture, right? So when Google tackled this problem, probably they were not as good as in 2008 than they are today. I don't know how many of you have been using the old schoolish type of tilde translator or prompt from Russian to English, and remember how bad it was. So if you take the same article which you have been translating at that time and put that in Google Translate today, probably you will see enormous progress in how it is actually going, and well, mostly with most popular languages, right? And what's interesting about the recent breakthrough around that is that Google applied neural networks to finding the right translation, and neural network actually built some kind of internal mechanism or trained itself in the way that it created some kind of own abstract metadata or meta language, right? Which actually is something in between one language and the other, which actually applies to our kind of communications in between different countries and different cultures and different localities. So imagine this thing. From artificial intelligence to cultural intelligence is the big leap, actually. So to understand for a machine how different people are communicating is a great way to go. But well, today we're still humans. We communicate with our friends via Facebooks and other things. And yes, we do understand each other, right? But we start in IT with one big thing, right? We have the system. We have the system and we need it to communicate with the other systems. So that's the one layer with which we're working, but it's probably the easiest part of the problem, right? So the challenge of our projects where we have diverse cultures and multi-country setups, multi-tenant solutions and so on, is actually quite complex on these several layers. So you have the system integration part, which is the technical level, then you have the people part, right? So to make these systems working, you need to integrate people amongst each other, right? So that's the hardest part. And even not taking in consideration that each team in each locality on its own is the separate organism, and you need to somehow communicate in between each other. And then you have the other team, right? So that makes some things a bit more complex. But how does that relate to our kind of software engineering approach and our area, right? Today, if you apply for a job, if you are a developer or an IT project manager, probably there are a few things definitely you should list on your CV or you should speak of with any recruiter. So first thing is intelligence quotient. So probably you run some tests with your recruiter and you prove that your operational skills, programming skills, and ability to learn those hard type of skills is good enough. So this is one thing. The other thing which nowadays is being highlighted as a very, very important topic is the emotional intelligence, right? So engineers are usually kind of very shy guys. Probably some of them are not so shy, but emotional intelligence is the soft part of the running the system, right? So, and when you apply, you usually have all those things listed and discussed with your potential employer, right? Ability to adapt in a team, agile work cadence, self-sufficiency, awareness, and so forth. So, which is very important if you work in one team, but even more important if you work in several teams which are culturally diverse. So, I would like to speak about the third thing, which is actually important today when we see so much of integration between different countries around the world, between different systems and companies. So the merger of my company particularly is a good example that if your company sometime decides to get a merger, you need to run those bigger projects which actually require multicultural cross-country type of migration projects and so on. So, the third thing, which is not probably highlighted too much today, is the cultural intelligence, which is getting traction in discussions around in the industry and so on. So, what exactly do you need to know to be a kind of culturally intelligent, right? So one thing maybe what comes to your mind is the traditional term cultural shock. So if you see something totally different, it's the shock, right? So how do you cope with that? Is it a one-time experience or it's kind of recurring type of activity? So that's the question, right? And what I actually combine in this presentation from my background running different projects within different countries is some kind of building blocks or some snippets of what you should take as an important topic when you run these projects in between different countries and in a multicultural mode. So these are namely cultural dimensions, which I will speak in a few seconds. Reasoning, how different cultures perceive reasoning. Work ethics, time perception, feedback, decisions, trust, management, how tasks are managed, and history. So, one good thing if you start a project which is combined from several teams in different countries, probably is a Geertz Hofstede, which is Dutch scientist and former IBM employee, cultural dimensions. So, actually he derived some 6 basic and key indicators which denote different cultural specifics of a particular country or nation. So one of them is power distance, which is the most important part. So how we operate within our environment. So there is a boss probably, there is an employee, lots of employees, and how do they actually make different decisions and approaches to different questions, how this is being perceived. Then there is individualism index. So some countries are more individual, so basically you take your own responsibility, you are kind of performing as a sole individual professional, or there's a collectivist type of environment. Uncertainty awareness, which is very interesting topic as well. Some cultures, some countries are quite resistant to risk, which is probably not the specifics of particular person, but just a cultural thing. Then there is one thing called indulgence. So this is kind of thing which is questioning how good you are at resisting some temptations or some of the things which you probably haven't thought of doing, but you are doing those, right? Long-term orientation is a thing about time, how basically you perceive the perspective of the cooperation in between the team. And masculinity, so basically there are alpha-female type of projects or cultures, and they are probably more feminine type of environments where it's more important the environment itself and the project contents and the work-life balance. So, if you take a look, basically that's a tip actually, you can go to geerthofstede.com each time you would like to compare some to countries or to cultures, you can go there and make this kind of graph and see and understand why probably we don't understand each other if we are kind of working on the same objectives, goals, we have the same skills, but still something is not gluing all together, right? So, for instance, if you take Portugal and Sweden and compare those side by side, the difference is quite drastic. One is like southern country with lots of sunshine, the other is in this industrialized northern country, and definitely you can find differences in how things are being perceived, which is very important when you work on a daily basis and we perceive that the thing should be one way or the other, right? So most important here is that when you find such a big difference, you probably, as a manager, might come up with some important problem which is related to your performance management of the team, which is feedback. Yeah, and within different cultures, the feedback, the direct or indirect feedback, might be perceived differently. So if you approach person with indirect feedback perceivance, with direct feedback, well, you might have a clash, and probably you might have a problem with the employee, ending up with maybe firing or running this person out of the project to the other team or to the other geographical location. So that's the problem which might be there. But that's not a personal issue. This is why it is important to understand that we're different, and this is the reason for the difference. Yeah.
What metrics are in that?
That's the index. So there is a description of the...
persons or...
Sorry? No, that's the index. There is a formula how it's being derived, and basically the comparison is that, yeah, one with the other is just...
Example for masculinity.
Yeah.
Maximum what can be on scale.
Personal target.
Let's save this up for the question session, and basically you can use this for any kind of detailed mining, right? Okay, so the other thing out of the box of the different things you should be noticeable of is the reasoning. So we different cultures have different backgrounds, right? So yeah, the guy actually warmed up the room. That's good. That's good. So the reasoning. So why we and how we reason in our life. What is the precursor of the reasoning in our life? Well, for different cultures, you actually rely sometimes, even if you don't know that, but that comes from your background, from the school and from your families and so on the philosophers, which left some trace in the kind of impact on the thinking. So for ancient Greeks, or for some southern countries, or for Western countries, it might be ancient Greeks. For British, it might be Francis Bacon. For French, it might be Descartes, and for Germanic countries, it might be Hegel. So those all are different type of approaches how to treat actually questions, how to communicate. So this is very important. So you know this guy probably if you have sometimes written outer join with two tables. So the Descartes multiplication gives a very bad result. So actually, in this case, it's good to know who this guy is and how he influenced the thinking of behind when you implement some things, right? So there are two approaches in reasoning. We can split those in two basic approaches. One is principles first, or deductive, and the applications first, inductive, right? So one is more like scientific or reasoning, Greek type of thinking, and yeah, mostly modern logical thinking, and the other is the inductive or applications first. So you need to have results or shown some kind of conclusions reached from real-world observations. So you have the fact, yes, in the real world you can see that, okay, let's tie it up together. So yeah, the different people, different approaches to reasoning. And the other thing is here, which is also very interesting, is the work ethics. So when you work with, for instance, with Sweden or Norway or with the northern countries, and you are coming from Eastern Europe or Far East, for instance, you might perceive sometimes your colleagues as lazy, which is not true. It's just kind of global specifics of the country and nation and the region, right? So on average, for instance, OECD annual hours worked by particular country is pretty much different, and it differs in a substantial way. For instance, Koreans, some maybe 17 years ago, just 17 years ago, were overworking their life out of their pants just to reach those results which we see today, right? So these kind of laziness perceivance is probably a bit subjective if you don't understand that that's the kind of current state of how things work in different countries, right? We all are different. So then the history. It is a very important topic if you speak with customer. If your daily job as engineer actually implies some kind of communication with your clients, you should understand the history, or at least have some kind of insight, right? So there are a few things which might irritate any European if you mention something from their kind of wars or controversies, right? So like, for instance, calling Ireland as a Southern Ireland, or Portuguese asking, do you speak Brazilian, or if my client, for instance, asks me, are you Russian from Baltics, or who are you, right? So there is an interesting arts series made by Thomas Cole, which denotes several stages of the empire. So each country, each nation has its history, good times, bad times. So probably you better prepare yourself with these kind of small interesting facts. So then there is a trust, right? In different nations or countries, you might have different perceivance of the trust. So how you trust person? In some, you trust just by observing the results. Like you have the task, you completed the task, you're a trustworthy person. In the others, you should actually have a drink of maybe Russian standard, and then you probably open up a bit these relationships to the different level. I'm speaking about my one of former clients, which I worked at Russian Standard Bank, so in Moscow. So this is the typical type of differences you might perceive. The left one, like Northern European, and here you might have something Southern or Eastern. So, question to engineers or software persons. So, what's the utmost question you handle during software releases and changes? If you release some software, you have a client, no matter where, what do you question when you need to release and do change in software? So, what's the main question? Or what you should do to actually make this either release or change to happen?
Темное или светлое?
So you need to decide, right? Right? Exactly. So decisions. So the decision-making process is also different in our different cultures, right? So there is kind of upper D decision process and the lower D decision process. So upper D doesn't mean probably same as what is lower D. So upper D might be a very good preparation in beforehand. You make the decision, and then you execute without changes in the path on the scale of millimeter. So that might be pretty much close and traditional in northern countries, in Nordics, where you will have a pretty good kind of pre-study of the project, and then you will execute that without questioning how bad was the decision. So you just need to execute that because, yeah, you spent a lot of time, it was consensus, and that's it. And there is a lowercase d, yeah? You can decide, some person takes the decision, maybe some tough guy from Russian Standard Bank comes into the room and says that everything will be shut down now and we need to redo this. So you throw out your plans and yes, you do something. Then you ask questions, you do the next decision, then you reach the result. So pretty kind of typical of these kind of things. So the challenge is that if somebody thinks in a left type of approach and then decides as a lefty, then the right person might be kind of unsatisfied and vice versa, right? When working in that kind of environments. You need to deploy, you need to approve changes. This is our daily work, and that's what makes us kind of having irritations in these areas. Task and time perception. So maybe you have seen these pictures somewhere outside there in blogs and so on. So that comes actually from German and Chinese comparison. So Germans, Chinese, how they queue. So how you stack up your tasks. For instance, for German or for Swede, it will be unacceptable and exceptionally rude to actually move somewhere in between, in the middle of the queue if you're waiting for a bus or buying a ticket. So exceptionally rude. So this is how they are planning and perceiving tasks as well. So you should understand that, for instance, in some Eastern cultures, it might be okay if you just squeeze in the middle of something, and well, that is how everything is done there, right? And the time perception, this is also important, that sometimes, yeah, if you work with, like, I don't know, Middle Eastern companies or clients, you might have incoming invitation for some time, which is in the past, which is quite fine from their perceivance, but probably not too much from Northern European perceivance. And yeah, if we speak about that kind of complexities, I wanted to ask, what are the characteristics of the project manager in that kind of environment which you see are the ideal or the best which should be in the project manager for everything to happen, like software runs smoothly, requirements are gathered from the client happy, developer happy, testers are shining, everything works. So what is, from your perspective, needed from project manager, or what's the ideal traits of project manager to run these kind of complex projects or culturally different projects?
Well,
any of these?
He has to be aware that there are these cultural differences, right?
maybe
That's a good start.
Yeah, good start.
Ability to adapt.
Ability to adapt, good thing actually. Ability to adapt probably starts with asking yourself all lessons you have learned, right? So probably you have tried something, you failed, and you need to switch that to some other direction and understand how that happens. So this is like 7 lessons I have learned personally from running these kind of projects. So yeah, just guess what I will say. Well, yeah, so seven lessons, and those are as follows. Invest in culture ambassadors or proxy agents, the persons who can glue together different teams and different sites in your project, right? So put all your effort, financial, into travel, training, the soft skills, and so forth. So those are the guys which has the fluids running in your project. Then set cultural norms early in the project. So if you assemble a team, please do think through what kind of issues you might come up with early enough, because at the middle of the end of the project, you might lose some of the team members just because you haven't spoke too much about the differences. Then empower those who acknowledge gaps. Exactly the point about learning things, right? If you understand yourself that you have the gap, please work on that. And as a manager, you should empower that person to work on that even more, because that's the way how it might work, right? The examples is like for Sweden, if you come over to Sweden, start reading about what's the Nordic model, what's the rules of Janteloven, and so on. The fourth one, understand the cultural and social background of the team. So just think through how any of your team members fit into this picture. The fifth one, physical distance of the team is not a factor. That's a very interesting thing. Imagine you are working with New Zealand, India, and Estonia. The problems will be still the same. Cultural shock, larger or smaller differences, but the problem, for instance, with your neighboring country might be that those problems are more hidden than when you work, for instance, with Indians or Chinese and so on. Right? So if in one way it's obvious that you're way too different than working just with your neighboring country, and then the specifics of the neighboring country might seem to you something like, oh, we know them much well, which is not true. Be ready for team members to probably also switch their roles if that is needed. So as a project manager, you should be always ready to do that, because, well, not everybody can survive in this kind of environment, but it's a tough and interesting type of projects where you can learn a lot. And the seventh, the last one, clearly align and articulate goals. Well, the goal might be written clearly, but the understanding might be different amongst different cultures. That's it from my side. Some of the good reads, if you are interested, maybe some of these books might help in digging down the topic. And yes, I would like to say that we're hiring, so we're hiring, we do need some .NET developers, project managers, so if you are interested, you can send me an email or come over after this speech. Okay, that's it.
Let's have 3 questions, no more this time.
I'm working in an international multicultural company, and I don't feel cultural boundaries. What I'm doing wrong?
Maybe you are doing everything right.
Maybe. But are they, maybe all these things is a little bit overestimated? Is it really a problem?
Yes.
It depends on, well, it's always sheer luck or coincidence if you are in a good project, which is like running for some years, maintenance project or implementation project. It's a big difference, right? But when you start from scratch, for instance, and you need to have a build project completely from foundation. You don't know the people, you don't have the team, you need to hire the team, and you need to actually start working with the client. You might encounter a lot of issues or grubbly, you know, okay.
Do you have an insight for, let's say I have to run a distributed project, will there be differences in problems with cultural differences in different types of project management versus, let's say agile versus waterfall? Which one is better in geographically distributed environment?
Yeah, definitely. I would say that even in this sense, agility and all those methodologies coming from the agile world, scrums and kanbans and waterfall are also kind of having some kind of some cultures leaning towards one or the other. That's definitely true. So all of these factors might contribute to that. For instance, if you try agile in some certain location, it might work. For the other place, it might not completely. So if you know, waterfall is like top-down approach, which quite closely matches the large and high power distance in indexing in the country difference. So if there are like kind of cultures of authority, then I think waterfall might be good enough for that. Now, well, from my experience, I might confirm that running some of the projects in Eastern countries, like post-Soviet Union countries, where there are like, well, you name the country and you have the authoritative person serving as a leader there for whole life. So that's kind of important to understand. What are the perceivance of the culture? Yeah.
So, can you get us example of funniest cultural failure?
Well, I was working actually in one Swedish-Indian project where I was in the middle trying to tie the both sides. So basically Latvia in the middle, India there, Sweden here. And well, my personal experience being in India on site quite for a while was that each day will have that kind of experience. One day will be very funny, other day probably will cry. So yeah, well, lots of stories, probably not for that.
This is Danish scientist posted
yeah.
Dutch.
Dutch.
So, did he also wrote how to exploit these cultural differences for greater benefit? How to exploit these people?
What to use them for?
The question was, does it provide the exploits for that, right? Or
how to use this cultural difference for
the
benefit?
Yeah, well, you definitely can, and you should. It's a matter of research.
Did he also write how to?
Check these sources. Many interesting stories, lots of laugh, and yeah. We're out of time, I guess.
Of CIA.
It's also hacker.
Right.
Can I go one more?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Thank you. So when you're working with people who are like underworking, such as Norwegian guys in your example, you probably expect them to deliver.
Yeah.
How do you cope? How do you make them? Or you just deal with it?
Well, that's an interesting topic. Well, you should understand the relationships of the orderer and the one fulfilling the order, right? So it's definitely a very kind of nasty topic, irritations and frictions around it. The tempo of work is different and so on. And there are cases when it's even opposite, right? So if, for instance, you work with Moscow clients and you deliver from Latvia, everything is slow here, and vice versa, you deliver for Sweden or Norway, you are running like a rabbit in the circle, but for them it's too fast, and you think that they are too lazy. So that's true, but you probably should understand that, which is even more important, be more on site. And try to understand the cultural perception of why this is happening. So you might return, if you are like traveling a lot, back with a totally different perspective on why the different things are happening too slow, which is probably not a problem of a particular person or two with which you are working, but just the system as a whole, and you cannot change that at all.
So you just account with that?
Yeah,
Okay.
in a sense,
Plan
yeah.
for it.
Okay, thank you.